The air inside the Colosseum trembled with sound. Thousands of alien voices echoed together, a storm of hisses, growls, and metallic tones that no human tongue could repeat. The arena was older than most civilizations present, carved from black stone that seemed to drink in the light of the stars above. At its center, the human envoy stood alone, surrounded by guards with blades made of shimmering plasma. His name was Elias Vane, and he had been brought here not as a guest, but as a spectacle. The alien empires had gathered for what they called the Convocation of Thrones, a meeting where disputes between great powers were settled through show of strength. Elias had come representing humanity, one of the youngest species in the stars, barely a child compared to the empires around him. No one expected him to last. Humans had no fleets vast enough to command respect, no weapons ancient enough to inspire fear, no psychic power that could rival the oldest races. To the audience, Elias was little more than a fragile creature pretending to stand among giants. The Empress of the Vare Dominion sat high above, her throne carved from living crystal that pulsed with light. She was tall and terrible, her form both beautiful and frightening, with eyes that glowed like suns caught in ice. When she rose to speak, the entire Colosseum fell into silence. "Human," she said, her voice ringing across the arena, "you are brought here to witness your place. Your species is weak, untested, and irrelevant. Before the gathered rulers of 10 galaxies, you will kneel, you will accept your station, or you will be erased." The guards pressed Elias forward until he stood in the very center of the arena. The vast audience leaned closer, eager for the moment when the human would bow or break. Elias looked up at the Empress. His heart hammered in his chest, but his face remained steady. He knew this was no trial for him alone, it was a test for humanity. If he bent the knee now, every alien race present would see humanity as nothing but cattle to be herded. He took a slow breath. "If you want me to kneel," he said, "you'll have to make me." A ripple went through the Colosseum. The gathered leaders hissed, muttered, and jeered. A weak species daring to speak so boldly, it was unheard of. The Empress's gaze narrowed and she gestured for the guards to strike him down. But before they moved, Elias rolled up his sleeve. The reaction was instant. Thousands of alien voices that had mocked him now fell silent. Where there should have been laughter, there was only stillness. On his forearm, burned into his skin as if by fire long ago, was a mark shaped like a spiral woven with lines that formed a star at its heart. The moment it was revealed, the Empress herself staggered back a step. Her glowing eyes widened, and for the first time in centuries, she felt something she thought she had forgotten. Fear. Gasps spread through the audience. Words hissed out in languages ancient and strange. "The mark," they whispered. "It cannot be." "The legend." Elias looked around, confused by their sudden change in mood. To him, the mark was nothing more than a scar he had carried since childhood, passed down from an ancestor whose name had been lost to history. He had never known what it meant. But now, seeing the reaction it caused, he realized it was no ordinary scar. The Empress gripped the armrest of her throne so tightly the living crystal cracked beneath her hand. She remembered the old stories whispered in the shadows of her empire. Long before her reign, before even the Dominion itself, there had been tales of a destroyer, a harbinger, one who bore the spiral star upon their flesh. Wherever the bearer walked, empires collapsed and chains were broken. Some called it myth, others prophecy, but all had agreed on one thing. If the mark ever returned, it would change the fate of the galaxy. "You," she whispered, though the entire Colosseum could hear her, "that mark belongs to a legend." Elias met her gaze, and though he did not understand the weight of her words, he understood their effect. For the first time since humanity had stepped into the wider galaxy, the other species were not laughing. They were not mocking. They were afraid. The guards who had been ready to strike him down now hesitated, their weapons trembling in their hands. The crowd, once eager for blood, now shifted uneasily as if uncertain whether to cheer or flee. The Empress, proud ruler of 10 galaxies, could not hide her unease. She had meant to humiliate the human, to break his spirit in front of all who watched. Instead, it was she who had faltered. Elias lowered his sleeve slowly, covering the mark again. He said nothing, letting the silence stretch. It was not defiance that held the arena in thrall now. It was the mystery of a scar whose meaning he had never understood. And in that silence, humanity's place among the stars began to change. The Empress sat down heavily upon her throne, her mind racing. She could not allow her fear to show any further, yet she knew what she had seen. The legend was alive, standing before her, wrapped in human flesh. And if the stories were true, then the era of alien dominance was about to end. The Empress did not speak again for several breaths. The silence pressed heavy on the crowd, broken only by the distant hum of the arena walls. Every ruler, warlord, and ambassador leaned forward, waiting for her to act. But her hands trembled ever so slightly, hidden in the folds of her robe. That alone unsettled them, for the Empress of the Ver Dominion was not known to tremble. Elias stood in the center of the Colosseum, watching her carefully. He had no idea why the scar on his arm had caused such a reaction, but he understood instinct. Instinct told him that fear had spread across the room, and fear was something he could use. He straightened his shoulders and locked eyes with the Empress, refusing to look away. One of the alien warlords finally broke the silence. A creature with scales of silver and a voice that cracked like thunder shouted from his balcony, "End him now, before the prophecy takes root." His words were echoed by others, a dozen voices rising at once. Some screamed for blood, others demanded the human be captured for study. A few, quieter than the rest, whispered that he should be spared. The Empress raised her hand and the noise stopped as if sliced in half. All eyes turned back to her. Slowly she stood, her long form casting a shadow over the arena. Her glowing eyes stayed fixed on Elias. "That mark," she said, her voice steady again, "was last seen when the Dominion was young. The one who bore it tore down fleets without ships. He broke chains without weapons. His very presence turned slaves into soldiers and soldiers into legends. He was called the Harbinger." Her voice deepened with memory, and when he rose, empires burned. Gasps rolled through the audience, though none dared speak too loudly. Elias frowned. The words meant little to him, but he could see their weight on the crowd. He had been captured, dragged here in chains, mocked as a weak representative of a weak species. Now the same rulers who had laughed at him looked as if they feared to even breathe in his direction. He lifted his arm again, showing the scar more clearly. "This mark," he said, his voice calm but carrying, "was given to me at birth. I never knew its meaning. But it seems you do." He let his gaze sweep across the balconies where the alien leaders sat. "So tell me, should I be afraid of it? Or should you?" The words struck like a blade. Murmurs filled the air, sharper than the roar of battle. The Empress clenched her jaw. She could not show weakness, not here, not now. Yet she felt the same shiver run down her spine as when she was a child, listening to forbidden tales whispered by old servants in the palace halls. She turned sharply to the crowd. "The Harbinger is dead. This human is nothing but a shadow. A scar means nothing." But her words sounded too quick, too forced. The crowd heard the strain. The seed of doubt had already been planted. Elias tilted his head, studying her. He could not read her alien expression fully, but he recognized the way she tried to control the room. He had seen generals back on Earth do the same when they were losing their grip on their troops. He decided to press further. "If you truly believe it means nothing," Elias said, his tone steady, "then strike me down yourself. Show them all you do not fear legends." The arena froze. The challenge hung in the air like a blade over the Empress's throne. Every ruler knew what it meant. If she killed him now, she might silence the whispers, but she might also prove them true. If she hesitated, if she faltered even for a heartbeat, the legend would only grow stronger. Her eyes burned brighter. She extended one hand and a wave of psychic energy poured from her like a storm. It crashed into Elias with invisible weight, pressing down on him, trying to crush him to the floor. His knees shook, his chest tightened, and his breath came ragged. For a moment he thought his body would shatter under the force, but he stayed standing. The pressure grew, enough to split the stone beneath his feet. His vision blurred, but still he refused to kneel. Every instinct screamed at him to fall, but something deeper held him upright. Pride, anger, and a stubborn will that no force could break. His teeth clenched, his muscles screamed, yet he raised his head and stared back at her with burning eyes. The audience leaned forward as one. Some hissed in fear, others in awe. The Empress's expression faltered for only a second, but that second was enough. "Everyone saw it, you see?" Elias gasped, forcing the words out against the crushing weight. "You think legends control me, but I tell you this, I'm not bound by your fear. I'm human, and humanity do. It's not boo." With a final growl, the Empress cut off her psychic attack. The air snapped back into stillness. Elias stood trembling, sweat running down his face, but he was still on his feet. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some shouted for his death with renewed desperation. Others whispered that the Harbinger had returned. A few, watching closely, began to see humanity not as prey, but as a rising power. The Empress sank back into her throne, her glowing eyes narrowing. She had failed to break him, and worse, she had revealed her fear. For the first time in centuries, the Empress of the Vare Dominion no longer controlled the room. Elias lowered his arm, covering the scar once more. He did not smile, but inside he felt a fire awaken. Whatever the mark meant, whatever the legend was, it had given him something priceless in this arena of predators. The advantage. The noise inside the arena spread like fire through dry grass. Every alien voice mixed together, a storm of fear, doubt, and anger. Some rulers demanded the humans' immediate death, shouting over one another as if louder words might drown out their fear. Others whispered quickly, calculating what it would mean if the legend was true. For centuries, they had treated humanity as a weak, unimportant race, barely worth notice. Now before their eyes, the youngest species stood unbroken against the Empress herself. Elias felt the tension thick around him. His body still ached from the crushing weight of the Empress's psychic power, but he held himself straight. To stumble now would be to hand the moment back to her. He let the crowd's whispers swirl while keeping his gaze calm and steady. He did not fully understand what the scar on his arm meant, but he saw clearly that it had power. Not in weapons or armies, but in fear. Fear, he realized, could be sharper than any blade. On the balcony of the crystalline throne, the Empress's eyes glowed colder. Her mind worked quickly, though no sign of it showed on her face. The prophecy she had spoken of was not supposed to be real. It had been buried under centuries of control and silence. But the sight of the mark had pulled it into the open again. She could feel the doubt of her rivals pressing on her like a weight heavier than any war. If she struck him down now, she risked becoming the tyrant who had feared a legend. If she let him live, the whispers would grow stronger. A heavy voice rose from the far side of the Colosseum. The silver-scaled warlord who had spoken before slammed his clawed hand on the railing. Do not hesitate. Legends are lies meant to weaken us. Kill him now, and end the shadow of fear. His words were met with cries of agreement from his allies, their bodies shaking with fury. Yet on another balcony, a smaller figure stood. A diplomat of the Jera, a people known for their long memory, raised his voice. No, we must not be blind. The mark is no ordinary scar. I have seen it in ancient records of my own world. If the Harbinger has returned, killing him will not end it, it will fulfill it. The arena shuddered with fresh noise, arguments spilling into the air. Some demanded blood, others demanded answers, and a few began to look at Elias not as prey, but as a player in a story larger than them all. Elias let them argue. Every second that passed made his position stronger. He thought of Earth, of humanity's history. His people had survived against odds that should have crushed them long ago. They had fought wars, crossed oceans, walked on moons, and stared down extinction more than once. Humanity had always been underestimated, by nature, by the universe, and now by the stars themselves. And always they had found a way to endure. He raised his voice, calm but clear enough to cut through the storm. You all fear a legend. You think a scar decides your fate. But I tell you this, your fear is not of me. It is of what I represent. Humanity has no great fleets. Humanity has no ancient weapons. But what we do have is will. We survive, we fight. We rise when others fall. And if that frightens you, perhaps it should. The words rippled outward, carried by translators into 100 alien tongues. The crowd grew restless, their whispers sharper now. Some hissed in anger, others in doubt. More than a few stared at Elias as if seeing humans for the first time. The Empress stood once more, her cloak of living light shifting around her. She raised her hand and silence fell again, though it trembled at the edges. Your words are clever, human. But words do not change destiny. You carry a mark of death. You carry a story that does not belong to you. Legends are dangerous because fools believe them. And fools can be many. Her gaze swept over the balconies, daring the rulers to argue. Some lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet her stare. But the doubt remained. Elias knew he could not outmatch her power. He had seen how close he had come to falling under her attack. But he also knew she could not erase the fear that now spread among her rivals. The more she denied it, the more it grew. He took another slow step forward, each movement echoing loudly in the silence. Then let them believe, he said, his voice steady. Let them fear. You say the Harbinger is a legend. Maybe you're right, but legends are not killed in silence. They are remembered. And right now, every eye here is remembering this moment. The Empress's hands tightened at her sides, and for a heartbeat her mask of control slipped. It was only a flicker, but the crowd saw it. They saw their Empress hesitate before a single human. The balance in the room shifted. A few rulers whispered urgently to their aides, already planning alliances or betrayals. The warlord with silver scales shouted again for blood, but his voice carried less weight now. The Jera diplomat lowered his head as if in respect toward Elias. And in the shadows of the balconies, agents and spies who had come only to observe now saw opportunity. Elias stood in the center of it all, breathing slowly. His body still ached, but his spirit burned brighter. He had come here as a prisoner. Now he stood as something more, not yet a leader, not yet a legend, but a spark. And sparks, he knew, could set fire to empires. The Empress's voice cut through the tension one last time. Enough, this matter is not ended. The human will remain under my custody until his fate is decided. Let all here remember what you have seen tonight, and let them remember. Fear alone does not decide destiny. The guards stepped forward again, but now their movements were slower, less sure. They looked at Elias with unease, as though afraid to touch him. The crowd began to break apart into clashing voices, the convocation slipping into chaos. Elias let them bind his hands once more, but inside he smiled. Chains no longer mattered. What mattered was that the galaxy had seen him stand. And more than that, they had seen the Empress falter. The corridors beneath the arena were dark and cold. The guards led Elias down stone passages lit by thin strips of pale energy that hummed softly. Their grip on his arms was firm, but their movements were strange, hesitant, uneasy. They had bound him again with cuffs of glowing metal, yet none of them looked him in the eyes. Elias walked in silence, listening to the echoes of their footsteps. His body still ached from the Empress's attack, but his mind was sharp. He knew something important had shifted in the arena. The mark on his arm had turned him from prey into a question, and questions, he thought, were more dangerous than blades. The guard stopped before a tall set of doors carved from black crystal. They opened with a low groan, revealing a chamber wider than a cathedral. At the far end stood the Empress, her throne rising high above the floor, its surface alive with streams of light. She was alone now, without her court or her soldiers, her glowing eyes fixed on him as he was pushed forward into the empty hall. "Leave us," she commanded. The guards obeyed instantly, stepping back through the doors and sealing them shut. Silence filled the chamber. Elias stood in the center, chains glowing faintly around his wrists, while the Empress sat like a figure of fire and shadow. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the Empress leaned forward, her voice low but sharp. "Do you know what you carry on your arm, human?" Elias lifted his bound hands and tugged his sleeve back, showing the spiral star once more. "I know it frightens you," he said. "That seems enough for now." Her eyes narrowed, but instead of rage, something else flickered in them. Memory. She rose slowly from her throne, her tall form moving with a grace that seemed both regal and predatory. Her steps echoed as she descended to the floor, her cloak of light flowing behind her. "When I was a child," she said, her voice quieter now, "I was told stories that were forbidden to repeat, stories of a figure who bore that mark. They called him the Harbinger. When he appeared, the greatest powers of that age trembled. He did not command fleets. He did not hold weapons. Yet entire empires fell when he walked among the stars. His strength was not his own, they said. It was the strength he awakened in others. Slaves rose against masters. Soldiers turned against tyrants. Chains broke." She stopped a few paces from him, her glowing eyes burning brighter. The last time he was seen, the Dominion was young. The galaxy was filled with rival empires, each claiming to be eternal. None survived. Only the Dominion endured, and we endured because he vanished. Without him, resistance crumbled. Without him, fear returned. And so we ruled. Elias studied her face. She was not mocking him now. Her voice held no arrogance. For the first time, he saw something close to honesty. "You fear that I am him," he said quietly. The Empress did not answer right away. Instead, she circled him slowly, like a predator unsure of its prey. "I fear what your mark represents. Legends are not chains of flesh, but chains of thought. If others believe you are the Harbinger reborn, they will rise. And if they rise, even the Dominion cannot hold them all down. Elias felt a cold weight in his chest. He had never thought of himself as anything more than a soldier, a voice for Earth among greater powers. Yet now these rulers saw him as a figure out of their darkest myths. He could not tell whether it was fate, coincidence, or some trick of history. But he knew one thing: the galaxy was watching him now. "You could kill me," Elias said. "End the story before it begins." The Empress stopped walking. For a moment the chamber was still. Then she gave a bitter smile. "Do you think I have not thought of that? If I strike you down, half the rulers who saw you stand today will say it proves the legend true. They will whisper that I feared you. They will rally behind your death. Killing you may destroy the body, but it will feed the myth." She lifted one hand and the air shimmered with power. Elias felt the pressure of her strength again, though lighter than before. "But if I keep you alive, I hold the legend in my hand. I can shape it. I can turn it into a tool. I can use you to keep the balance of fear under my control." Elias met her gaze, unflinching. "Or maybe the legend will use me instead. Maybe it will slip from your grip no matter how tightly you hold it." The Empress's smile faded. She studied him for a long moment, and in her eyes burned something between respect and dread. Then she stepped back, her cloak flickering. "You are clever," she said. "Too clever for your kind. I will not kill you yet, but do not mistake survival for victory. You are still my prisoner, and I will decide when and how this legend of yours ends." The doors behind Elias opened and the guards returned. Their faces were tight, their movements stiff. The Empress turned away, climbing the steps back to her throne. She did not look at Elias again. The guards pulled him back toward the corridor, but he barely noticed their touch. His mind was racing. The Empress had admitted what the others only whispered. The mark was real. The legend was real, at least in their minds. And now the most powerful ruler in the galaxy was trapped by her own fear of it. As he walked back through the cold halls, Elias felt the fire inside him grow. He had no armies, no ships, no weapons to call his own. But he had something greater: belief. Not his own, but theirs. And in the galaxy, belief could topple thrones. The chamber Elias was kept in was not a cell of stone, but a hall of polished black crystal. The Empress had chosen not to throw him into the dungeons like a common prisoner. Instead, he was locked in a high chamber with no windows, its walls glowing faintly with energy. To the guards, it was still a prison. To Elias, it was something else. It was a stage. Through hidden seams in the walls, voices carried to him. He could hear the arguments of the rulers who remained after the convocation. They did not know the chamber echoed sound so strangely, but Elias listened closely. Their voices revealed more than chains ever could. Some demanded his death. Their words were sharp and fearful, insisting that the harbinger must not rise again. Others, more cautious, argued for his survival. They spoke of using him, studying him, or turning him into a symbol they could control. And then there were whispers, soft and dangerous, from those who believed the Empress had already lost her grip. They wanted to see if humanity might be worth following instead. Elias sat in silence, letting the voices weave a picture of the galaxy around him. Every empire was powerful on its own, but together they were fragile. Fear divided them. Fear of the Empress. Fear of each other. And now fear of him. When the doors finally opened, it was not the Empress who entered, but a group of delegates. They came not as guards, but as messengers, their bodies cloaked in colors of their species. A thin creature with 6 arms spoke first, its voice high and buzzing. "Human, we come to question you. The Empress allows this. For now." Elias rose slowly. His chains still glowed faintly, but he held himself with calm strength. The delegates studied him carefully, their eyes searching for weakness. One of them, the Jera diplomat he had seen in the arena, stepped closer. His voice was soft but carried weight. "Do you know the story you wear on your flesh?" Elias shook his head. "No, I only know what you all seem to fear. You tell me it belongs to a legend. Perhaps it does. But I am not here to be a ghost from your past. I am here as a man, as a human." The room shifted with unease at his words. Some of the delegates hissed or muttered, but the Jera diplomat did not look away. "Then speak, human. What is humanity? Why should we not see you as prey? Why should your kind matter at all?" Elias took a slow breath. He knew this moment mattered. He was not strong enough to break chains nor powerful enough to fight empires, but he had a voice, and a voice used well could move mountains. "When humanity first looked up at the stars," Elias began, "we thought we were small, alone. The universe seemed endless, and we were nothing but dust. But still we dreamed. We built fires against the dark. We crossed oceans when we had no maps. We climbed mountains just to see what was beyond them. We made mistakes, yes, many mistakes. But we endured them. That is what it means to be human. We fall, and we rise again. The delegates shifted uneasily, their translators humming as his words carried across the chamber. Elias saw curiosity in some of their faces, even a flicker of respect. He pressed on. You look at us and see weakness. No fleets, no ancient weapons. But what you call weakness, we call hunger. Hunger to learn, hunger to survive. You fear legends because they say empires fall. I say this, empires fall because they forget what it means to fight for tomorrow. Humanity has not forgotten. Humanity lives for tomorrow. Silence followed his words. The six-armed creature tilted its head as if confused, but others lowered their eyes deep in thought. The Jera diplomat's expression shifted in a way Elias could not read, but his voice was softer when he spoke again. Perhaps you are not the Harbinger reborn. Perhaps you are something else. He turned to the others. Perhaps humanity is not to be ignored. One of the harsher delegates hissed in anger. Do not be fooled by words. He is dangerous. His kind is dangerous. You heard the Empress. The mark cannot be allowed to rise again. But even as he spoke, Elias saw the doubt in their movements. Fear was no longer united against him. It was divided, tangled, and spreading. That division, he knew, was his true weapon. When the delegates left, the guards brought Elias back to silence. But he no longer felt alone. He knew his words had spread cracks through the walls of fear. Somewhere in the galaxy, those cracks would grow. Later, the Empress returned to see him. She stood at the far end of the chamber, her cloak glowing faintly, her eyes cold. You speak well, she said. Too well. Already whispers spread. Already rulers question me because of you. Elias met her gaze. You fear my words more than my mark. That should tell you something. Her eyes flared with anger, but also with something else. Something Elias had seen before in the arena. Doubt. She turned sharply, her cloak swirling. Enjoy your voice while you can, human. When the galaxy burns because of you, remember it was your tongue that lit the fire. When she left, Elias sat in silence again. But this time silence was not empty. He could feel the weight of his words moving outward like ripples in water. Humanity's voice had been heard. And in a galaxy of fear, even a whisper could become thunder. The Empress did not summon Elias to her throne the next day. Instead, he was taken to a chamber unlike any he had seen before. The walls shimmered with pale light, bending like water. Strange patterns shifted across the floor, glowing symbols that changed with every step the guards took. He felt a pressure in the air, heavy and sharp, as if the very room was alive. The guards said nothing as they left him there, and the doors closed behind them with a sound like grinding stone. Elias stood in the center, his hands still bound, his body tense. He had learned enough in these days to know this was not a trial of words. The Empress wanted to test him, to break him in some way that would silence the whispers spreading across the galaxy. The air rippled and she appeared. Not stepping through a doorway, but simply forming out of the light itself. She stood taller than before, her cloak flowing with living fire, her eyes burning white. Her presence filled the chamber, making the space feel smaller and heavier. You speak well, human, she said, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. You use words like weapons, and you strike with them cleverly. You have turned rulers against each other without ever raising your hand. But legends are not made of words alone. Legends are tested in fire, and I will see if you burn. Elias clenched his jaw but said nothing. He had already guessed what was coming. The floor beneath him shifted, glowing brighter. The patterns twisted, and from the light rose shapes, creatures made of shadow and fire, their forms flickering like smoke but solid enough to claw and strike. They circled him, growling in voices that rattled his bones. The Empress raised her hand. Face them! Survive, and perhaps you prove so. Meeting more than a clever tongue, the shadows lunged. Elias twisted aside, barely avoiding claws that scraped across the glowing floor. His chains slowed him, his body still sore from her earlier attack, but he moved with the instinct of a soldier. He ducked, rolled, and pushed himself to his feet again, heart hammering. The creatures came at him one after another. He had no weapon, only his fists and his will. When the first shadow leapt, Elias swung with all his strength. His blow passed through smoke, but it struck something solid beneath, and the creature staggered back with a hiss. The others snarled and rushed in. He fought like a man drowning in the ocean, every breath a struggle. every strike a desperate choice. The shadows tore at him and pain seared his arms and chest where their claws grazed him, but he refused to fall. Every time he was knocked down, he forced himself back up. His body screamed in protest, but his mind roared louder. "You want me to kneel," he gasped as he struck another shadow aside. "You want me to break. But I told you, humanity does not bow." The Empress watched silently from the edge of the chamber, her eyes unreadable. She had expected him to fail quickly, to be crushed by fear or exhaustion. Instead, she saw a man battered, bleeding, yet still rising. Every fall only hardened his stance. Every wound only sharpened his eyes. The shadows circled again, hissing. Elias's breath came ragged, but he raised his fists once more. His body swayed with exhaustion, but his voice was steady. "Come on, then." "I'm not done." Something shifted in the chamber. The light on the floor brightened, the symbols twisting faster. The shadows paused, as if uncertain. The mark on Elias's arm burned faintly through his sleeve, glowing with a soft fire of its own. He did not notice it, but the Empress did. Her eyes widened slightly, her calm mask cracking. The creatures lunged once more, but this time Elias moved with sudden clarity. His strikes landed harder, his balance sharper. It was as if the mark itself fueled his will, not giving him strength beyond nature, but drawing out every last drop of what he already had. He fought not as a myth, but as a man refusing to surrender. And that, the Empress realized, was more dangerous than any prophecy. At last the shadows broke apart, fading into smoke and vanishing into the floor. The room stilled, its patterns dimming. Elias stood trembling, his chest heaving, sweat and blood running down his face. But he was still standing. He lifted his head and met the Empress's eyes. "Is that enough for you?" he asked, his voice raw but unshaken. The Empress's cloak flickered. She did not answer at once. Her gaze lingered on him, then on the faint glow of the mark beneath his sleeve. For the first time in centuries, she felt the ground shift beneath her rule. This human had survived what should have broken him. He had stared into fear and walked through it. At last she spoke. "You are dangerous," she said softly. "Not because of the mark, not because of the legend, but because you refuse to fall." Elias straightened even though his body trembled with exhaustion. "Then you finally understand what humanity is." The Empress's eyes narrowed, but she did not deny it. She turned, her form flickering back toward the throne that waited beyond the light. "This is not finished. The galaxy will see what you are, and when it does, we will see if they fear you or follow you." The light around her dimmed and she vanished, leaving Elias alone in the silent chamber. He sank to his knees, breathing hard, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. The Empress had tried to break him, and instead, she had given the galaxy something it could not ignore. The convocation hall was filled again. Rulers, diplomats, warriors, and shadows of empires gathered in the vast chamber, their voices sharp and restless. The air trembled with tension, because the Empress had called them all once more. The galaxy waited to see what she would do with the human who carried the mark. Elias was led into the center of the hall. His wounds from the trial still showed on his body, but he walked straight, his step steady, his head unbowed. Chains still bound his wrists, glowing faintly, but they no longer seemed to hold him. Every eye turned toward him, and the silence pressed like a storm. The Empress sat upon her throne, high above the hall. Her presence was fierce, her cloak alive with light, but her gaze was not the same as before. Something sharp lingered there, but also uncertain. She had seen him endure what should have destroyed him. She had seen the mark awaken faintly, and worse, she had seen him win hearts with nothing but his words. When she rose, the voices fell silent. "Rulers of the galaxy," she said, her voice carrying like thunder. "You called for judgment upon the human. You feared the mark he bears, the symbol of an old legend. You demanded his death, but I tested him. I pushed him into the fire, and he did not break." A ripple of unease moved through the hall. Some leaned forward, others muttered among themselves. The Empress pointed toward Elias. "He stands here not as prey but as proof. Humanity is not the fragile dust you thought. They are not to be dismissed, and now you must choose, fear them or accept them." The hall erupted in argument. Some rulers cried out that humanity must be destroyed before it grew dangerous. Others shouted that killing him now would make the legend stronger, not weaker. A few voices, softer but growing bolder, spoke of alliance, of the need for something new in a galaxy where even the mighty had grown afraid of their own shadows. Through it all, Elias stood silent, listening. Then, as the voices swelled, he lifted his head. He did not shout, but when he spoke, his words cut through the noise. "You speak of fear as if it rules you," he said. His voice was steady, echoing across the chamber. "Fear of me, fear of my kind, fear of the Empress, fear of each other. But listen to me. Fear has no throne. It is not a crown. It is a chain, and I will not wear it." The rulers quieted. Eyes turned fully to him now, the argument silenced by the weight of his words. "When I stood in your arena, I was nothing but a man, bleeding and alone. Yet I endured. When I was tested in fire, I did not bow, not because of some prophecy, not because of some ancient mark, but because I am human, because my people do not break. You fear a legend, but you should understand this. Humanity does not need legends to rise. We make our own." The silence deepened. Even the Empress, who had meant to show his strength as proof of her control, felt the words strike deeper than she expected. Elias lifted his bound hands. The mark glowed faintly beneath his skin, but his eyes were brighter than the light. "You can kill me here. Strike me down. Call me Harbinger, curse my name, bury me beneath your fears. But it will not matter, because my voice has already been heard, because now you know what humanity is, and you cannot unhear it. You cannot unsee it. Humanity will come. Humanity will stand. And when we do, we will not come as slaves or shadows. We will come as equals." For a long moment, no one moved. The chamber felt frozen, as if the galaxy itself held its breath. Then slowly, voices began to rise again. But they were not the same as before. Some still shouted for his death, but others spoke of new paths, new alliances, new fears and hopes tangled together. A few even spoke words of respect. The legend of the Harbinger was no longer a curse whispered in the dark. It was alive, breathing, reshaped in the form of a human who refused to bow. The Empress watched him, her expression unreadable. She had sought to silence him, to prove him powerless. Instead, she had given him the stage upon which a new story began. She saw it now. The legend was not chains on him. It was chains on them. Because the more they feared it, the stronger it became. And Elias, by refusing to be broken, had turned fear into fire. She raised her hand, and the voices fell silent again. "The human lives," she declared at last, her tone sharp, though her eyes betrayed something deeper. "He lives because he has earned his place before you. But know this, his kind is coming. And if you wish to survive what is coming, you must decide now. Will you stand against them, or beside them?" The hall burst into debate once more, but Elias did not flinch. He felt the tide had turned, not completely, but enough. A door had opened for humanity, carved not by fleets or weapons, but by his endurance, his words, his refusal to kneel. As the Empress turned back to her throne, her eyes met his one last time. For the first time since they met, there was no pure anger there, only respect and perhaps the faintest trace of fear. Elias lowered his head, not in defeat, but in quiet resolve. Humanity's place in the stars had begun, not through conquest, but through defiance. And somewhere in the vast silence of the galaxy, a new legend was already being written. The legend of humanity.